She came to America with a dream, a flawless resume, and the memory of one reckless, perfect night she was determined to forget. He was supposed to stay a stranger. On her first day at her dream job, Ali Yemi walks through those corporate doors ready to conquer, until she looks up and finds herself face to face with him. The man from that night, the tattoos on his neck, the dark eyes she hasn't been able to stop thinking about. Her boss. Jae-won Park is everything a woman with good sense should walk away from. Powerful, guarded, and carrying the weight of a family empire that doesn't exist entirely in the light. He built his empire in boardrooms and back rooms. He doesn't do complicated. Then she walked in. Ali had told herself this morning would be perfect. She had woken up at 6, pressed her blazer the night before, laid out her heels, rehearsed her introduction in the bathroom mirror until it stopped sounding rehearsed. She had taken the subway instead of a cab because she wanted to feel the city, wanted to arrive at her new life with the energy of someone who had earned every step of the way here. She was ready. Lagos had made her ready. 2 years of grinding in London had made her ready. 18 months of applications, rejections, and one final glorious yes had made her ready. Nothing had made her ready for him. The office was everything she had imagined. Clean lines, glass walls, the kind of quiet that expensive buildings have, where even the air feels curated. A young assistant named Maya walked her through the lobby, past the front desk, into an elevator that opened on the 34th floor like a curtain rising on a stage. Maya was still talking, something about lunch orders on Thursdays, something about the coffee machine, when the door at the end of the corridor opened. Ali stopped listening. He walked out like a man who had never once questioned whether he belonged in a room. Tall, broad, dressed in a dark suit that sat on his shoulders like it had been made for him specifically and no one else. His face was sharp and serious and achingly familiar. And there, running up from the collar of his white shirt, winding around the side of his neck, tattoos. Dark, intricate, unmistakable. She knew those tattoos. She had traced the edge of one with her fingertip 3 weeks ago in a dimly lit hotel bar, leaning close because the music was loud and he smelled like cedar and something warmer. She had laughed at something he said. He had looked at her like she was the most interesting thing he had seen in years. They had talked for 4 hours. Then they had kissed in the elevator going up. Then she had made a very grown woman decision that she had been privately proud of and publicly silent about ever since. Now he was standing 12 feet away from her in her new workplace, and the expression on his face told her that he recognized her at exactly the same moment she recognized him. The world went very still. His eyes moved over her face slowly. Something shifted in them, surprise, and then something softer and more complicated, and then nothing. A door closing. A man putting himself back together in real time. He walked toward her. She stood her ground. Shoulders back. Chin up. The way her mother had taught her. He stopped in front of her and extended his hand. "Miss Yemi," he said. His voice was low and even and gave absolutely nothing away. "I'm Jae-won Park. Welcome to the company." His hand was warm. She remembered that too. "Mr. Park," she said. Her voice came out steady. She was quietly amazed. "Thank you. I'm very glad to be here." He held her gaze for exactly 1 second longer than necessary. Then he turned and walked back toward his office, said something brief to Maya about her onboarding schedule, and disappeared behind his door. Ali let out a slow breath through her nose. Maya was looking at her. "Ready to see your desk?" "Yes," Ali said. She picked up her bag. She followed Maya down the corridor. She sat down at her new desk, opened her new laptop, and stared at the screen for a full minute without reading a single word on it. Then she pressed her hands flat on the desk, took one more breath, and got to work. She had not crossed an ocean to fall apart on the first day. Whatever this was, whatever he was, it was gonna have to wait. The first week was an exercise in controlled agony. Ali was good at her job, exceptional actually. Her role as senior operations analyst required her to restructure the company's logistics pipeline, a task she attacked with the focus of a woman who had learned early that competence was her armor. She buried herself in spreadsheets, supply chain data, and efficiency reports. She was in the office before anyone else and left after most had gone. She did not think about J1 Park. She thought about J1 Park constantly. He was, infuriatingly, the kind of man who commanded a room without appearing to try. She watched him from the periphery of boardroom meetings, the quiet authority of his posture, the precise economy of his words. Employees spoke about him in reverent, slightly fearful tones. The CEO of Park and Stone at 34. The youngest in the company's history. Brilliant, demanding, and private in a way that suggested depths no one had been invited to explore. No one, apparently, except her. On Wednesday afternoon, he called her into his office. The space was immaculate. A vast desk of dark walnut, bookshelves lined with architecture and finance texts, and a single low orchid in a white ceramic pot that seemed oddly delicate against everything else. Through the floor-to-ceiling window, Manhattan sprawled below like a circuit board. He was standing at the window when she entered, his back to her. She noticed, with a traitorous flutter in her stomach, that his jacket was off and his sleeves were rolled to his forearms, the tattoos continuing there. Intricate, dense, a map of something deeply personal. "Close the door," he said, without turning. She closed it. He turned. His dark eyes found her immediately, as though he'd known exactly where she was standing. "We need to address what happened," he said, quiet, direct, the voice of a man who had made peace with uncomfortable conversations by having them immediately. "Nothing happened," Ali said. "We had drinks. We talked." She held his gaze. It was a long time ago. Something moved behind his eyes. 3 weeks. A professional eternity. A silence stretched between them, electric with everything they weren't saying. "I reviewed your file before I offered you this position," he said finally. "Your work is extraordinary. I want you to know that the hiring decision was made entirely on merit." "I know," she said simply, "because she did." "Good." He turned back to the window. "Then we understand each other." She left his office with her composure intact and her heart hammering like it was trying to escape her ribs. Understanding each other, she was beginning to realize, was the easy part. It was forgetting that night that was going to kill her. It was the quarterly review that cracked the careful plaster of their professionalism. They had been left alone in the conference room, Ali and J1, after the rest of the team filed out following a 3-hour session. The whiteboards were covered in her diagrams. She'd led the entire presentation, dismantling the current logistics model with surgical precision and rebuilding it in front of 20 executives in a way that generated 2 standing ovations and a memo from the board chair. She was packing up her materials when she felt him behind her. Not touching, simply present. Close enough that she could smell the faint cedar and smoke of his cologne. A scent she had memorized without meaning to. "That was exceptional," he said quietly. She turned around. He was closer than she'd expected, and for a moment the professional distance they'd been so carefully maintaining seemed very thin. A sheet of paper between a flame and kindling. "Thank you," she said, steady. His eyes moved over her face with an attention so focused it felt like touch. "You were like that the night we met," he said. "You argued with me for 40 minutes about urban infrastructure, and you were right about every point." She laughed before she could stop herself. A real laugh, warm and surprised. "You were so certain you were right." "I was," he said, and the corner of his mouth lifted barely, just a fracture in the stillness of his face. About most of it, it was the smile that undid her, small and rare and directed at her like a secret. She looked away first, a discipline she was developing. "We should get back," she said. "Yes," he agreed, but neither of them moved for a breath, 2 breaths, 3, suspended in the specific gravity of almost. Then his phone buzzed on the table and the world resumed. He picked it up, glanced at the screen, and his expression shuddered immediately. The warm fracture gone, replaced by something cold and careful. He answered in Korean, his voice dropping into tones she didn't understand but recognized. Business of a different kind. She gathered her things and left. In the elevator, she pressed her back against the wall and breathed. She had heard things about Jaewon Park before she accepted the position. Whispers she'd filed under rumor and jealousy. That the Park family's wealth had roots older and deeper than legitimate business. That Jaewon himself, despite the polished suit and the corner office, moved through certain circles where the currency wasn't stock portfolios. She had chosen to believe in the man she'd seen across the boardroom table. She was starting to understand that the man with tattoos up his neck and a phone call that froze his eyes might be more complicated than a quarterly review. She found out on a Thursday evening, and she found out by accident. She had gone back to the office for her laptop, left behind in her haste to make a dinner reservation that she ultimately canceled for reasons that had nothing to do with hunger. The floor was quiet, the lights dimmed to their after-hours amber. She took the stairs, a habit she'd formed to clear her head. The voices reached her before she reached the 34th floor. Low voices, tense, in the corridor near Jaewon's office. She shouldn't have stopped on the landing. She shouldn't have pressed herself against the wall and strained to hear. She was not that woman. She was apparently exactly that woman. Through the fire door's narrow window she could see Jaewon, jacket off, standing in front of 2 men she didn't recognize. Older, hard-faced, wearing the particular blankness of people accustomed to violent work. The exchange was in Korean, rapid and low, but the body language transcended language. One of the men spread photographs across the desk. Jaewon studied them without expression, then said something short and final. The men left. Jaewon stood at his desk, both palms flat on the surface, head bowed. He looked, from her hidden vantage, like a man carrying a weight that had no name in polite company. She retreated, took the stairs back down, walked out into the cold night air. The Park family's history was not difficult to find, for someone who knew where to look. She spent 2 hours that night with her laptop at her kitchen table, following threads she should probably have followed before she ever set foot in that building. The Park Syndicate had been a fixture of organized power in New York's Korean community for 3 generations. Jaewon's grandfather had built it, his father had modernized it, and Jaewon, brilliant, controlled, legitimizing, had spent the last decade pouring its wealth into legitimate enterprise while maintaining, as best anyone could tell, the alliances that came with inheritance. He was not a simple man. She already knew that. What unsettled her was that knowing it changed nothing. She closed her laptop, looked at the dark window of her Brooklyn apartment, the city lights blurring through the glass. She thought about the way he'd smiled at her in the conference room. "This is a problem," she told her reflection. Her reflection offered no useful advice. The company retreat was Jaewon's idea, and Ali cursed every inch of the Catskills estate he'd rented for it. 2 days, 12 senior staff, 1 sprawling mountain house with fireplaces in every room and a view of the valley that would have been romantic under literally any other circumstances. She had packed practically. Thick sweaters, wool socks, her absolute most sensible pajamas, as though the right wardrobe could armor her against the specific problem of Jaewon Park in a setting with no conference tables to hide behind. The first evening was fine. A group dinner, wine, conversation about Q3 projections that she drove with the focused energy of a woman who absolutely was not sneaking glances at the man at the head of the table. It was after dinner that the architecture of distance collapsed. She'd gone to the library. A real one, walls of books, a fireplace crackling low, to work through some notes. She'd been there an hour when the door opened. J1 stood in the doorway, a glass of whiskey in one hand, his tie loosened, his jacket gone. The firelight caught the lines of his face and the tattoos at his collar and made him look less like a CEO and more like the man she'd met at that downtown bar. Unguarded, slightly dangerous, magnetic. "I didn't know anyone was in here," he said. "You can stay," she said. The words surprised her by being true. He crossed the room and sat in the armchair opposite her, not at the desk, not at a professional distance, close. The fire crackled between them. They talked, not about work, about her, growing up in Lagos, the third of 5 children, her mother's insistence on education as the only inheritance worth having, the particular loneliness of being exceptional in rooms that weren't built for you. He listened with that absolute, focused attention of his, and she felt the strange vulnerability of being genuinely heard. Then she asked him about the tattoos. A pause. He looked at his forearms, then back at her, and she saw him make a decision. "My father had them," he said. "His father had them. In my family they are a record. What you've survived. What you've sworn." He turned his wrist to show her a particular mark near his pulse. "This one I chose myself. It means, roughly, that I answer for my own choices." She reached forward, without thinking, and traced the edge of it with one finger. He went very still. She pulled her hand back. The fire popped. "Ali," he said. Her name in his voice was a different thing than her name anywhere else. "I know," she said. "I know." They sat in the firelight for a long time, not touching, saying nothing more. It was the most intimate conversation she'd had in years. It was the second night of the retreat when the careful structure they'd built finally gave way. The others had gone to bed early, worn out by a full day of strategy sessions and mountain air. Ali had stayed on the back porch, wrapped in a heavy blanket, watching the snow that had started falling over the valley, fat, lazy flakes that softened the world and made Manhattan feel like a different universe entirely. She heard his footsteps on the deck behind her. She didn't turn around. He stood beside her at the railing. For a while neither of them spoke. The snow fell and the valley glowed pale blue below. "I've been thinking about that night," he said finally. "So have I. I've been trying not to. So have I." He turned toward her then, and she turned toward him, and in the space between them was 3 weeks of pretending and a fire that apparently burned just fine in the snow. "This is complicated," she said. Not a refusal, a statement of fact. "Everything worth having is," he said. Then he touched her face. One hand, palm against her cheek. His thumb brushing her cheekbone with a tenderness that undid every layer of professional distance she'd spent weeks carefully constructing. He looked at her like she was something rare, something he hadn't expected and hadn't prepared for. "Tell me to stop," he said quietly. She didn't tell him to stop. She kissed him instead, or perhaps he kissed her. It was impossible afterward to say who moved first. Only that when they did move it was inevitable, like two currents finally meeting. His arms came around her, pulling her into the warmth of him, and she felt the cold night and the snowflakes and the entire careful edifice of their professional relationship dissolve into something older and truer and entirely beyond the reach of office policies. When they finally broke apart, foreheads touching, breath visible in the cold air, she laughed softly. The particular laugh of someone who has just lost an argument they knew they were going to lose. "We're going to make this very complicated," she said. "Yes," he agreed, and kissed her again. The snow kept falling. The valley held its breath. daylight and its consequences. Morning arrived with the particular cruelty of clarity. Ollie lay in the early gray light of the guest room she'd returned to alone. A decision they'd made together, quietly, and understanding that whatever this was needed to be handled with more care than a hotel room could provide. She stared at the ceiling and had a frank conversation with herself. She was sleeping with, or very nearly sleeping with, her boss. Her boss, who happened to be the man she'd had the best conversation of her adult life with 3 weeks ago before things had gone beautifully sideways. Her boss, who ran a legitimate corporation with one hand and, she was fairly certain, an inherited criminal enterprise with the other. She was not a woman who made simple choices. She was willing to accept this about herself. At breakfast, J1 was impeccable, composed. He passed her the coffee carafe with the same easy professionalism he'd managed since her first day, and anyone watching would have seen nothing more than a CEO and his analyst being politely collegial over eggs. But his hand brushed hers when she took the carafe. Deliberately, unmistakably, a whole conversation in the half-second of contact. Back in Manhattan, they fell into a rhythm that was neither fully professional nor fully personal, a territory with no map. He texted her late at night, questions that started as work and drifted. She answered. They talked. About her family, about the company he was building and the legacy he was trying to shape into something different from what he'd inherited. "Do you ever want to leave it entirely?" she asked one night, 3 weeks after the retreat. They were in his apartment, the first time she'd been there. Tall and spare and filled with books and a silence that felt inhabited rather than empty. "The business," he said. He was sitting on the floor, his back against the couch, and she was beside him, shoulder to shoulder. "All of it. The other part." He was quiet for a long time. "I've spent 10 years trying to make the exit. There are people who don't want me to find it." She absorbed this. "Are you in danger?" He looked at her. "I try very hard not to be." "That's not the same as no." "No," he agreed. "It's not." She leaned her head against his shoulder. He pressed his lips to the top of her head, brief, warm, a gesture so quietly tender it settled in her chest like something permanent. She understood then that she was not falling. She had already fallen. The question was what he'd do when he realized the same thing about himself. The envelope arrived at her desk on a Tuesday. No return address. Her name on the front in clean block letters. Inside, a single photograph. Her and J1 on the back porch of the Catskills house. His hand on her face, her hands on his chest, the snow falling around them. On the back, in the same block letters, * walk away. This isn't your world. *. She sat with it for 10 minutes. Then she walked to J1's office and placed it on his desk. He read it once. His jaw tightened by a fraction, the only tell he allowed himself. He turned the photograph over, and then back, studying the image with the focused, dispassionate attention of a man who had been trained to think clearly when other people would panic. "When did this arrive?" he asked. "This morning, before anyone else was in." He nodded slowly. Stood. "I need you to hear what I'm about to say." She waited. "There are people who would like to pressure me through the people I care about." He said it evenly, but the phrase "the people I care about" rang between them with unmistakable weight. "This photograph tells me someone has been watching. It tells me they know that you—" He stopped, started again. "That you matter. J1. I would understand," he said. "If this changes things. I would understand if you decided this isn't." "Stop," she said. He stopped. She crossed the room to his desk. Looked up at him. He was half a head taller and radiated, in this moment, a contained fury that only made him more compelling. "I grew up in a country where the powerful threatened the ordinary to keep them afraid," she said quietly. I didn't come to America to be afraid of an anonymous photograph. Something moved across his face, startled and grateful and aching all at once. You should be afraid, he said, not unkindly. A little. It's sensible. I'm sensibly afraid, she said. And I'm not leaving. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out and tucked a strand of her curly hair back from her face, the gesture unbearably gentle for a man who could fill a room with his contained violence. I'll handle it, he said. I know you will, she said. Ollie. Yes. Thank you. She nodded, walked back to her office, let herself shake, quietly, for exactly 2 minutes. Then she got back to work. He handled it. She never asked exactly how, and he never told her exactly, and this was perhaps the first real negotiation of the terms on which they would love each other, the lines of what she needed to know and what he needed to carry alone. What she did know was that for 3 days J1 disappeared into a part of his life that didn't wear a suit. He called her every evening, not to explain but to hear her voice. Brief calls. He asked about her day, about a book she was reading, about whether the coffee machine on 34 had been fixed yet. Small, ordinary things, asked with a concentration that suggested they were anchoring him. On the 4th day he came to her apartment. It was late. She opened the door and he was there. Not polished, not composed, wearing dark jeans and a jacket and the exhaustion of a man who had spent 3 days being something he was trying to stop being. There was a small cut on his jawline she didn't ask about. She stepped back and let him in. He sat on her couch and she brought him tea. She was out of whiskey, she apologized, and he drank it without complaint and looked around at her apartment with the quiet attention he gave everything. Her apartment was full of her. Encre print throw pillows, photographs of Lagos on the walls, a shelf of novels with cracked spines, her running shoes by the door, a half-finished canvas on the easel in the corner that she'd been meaning to return to for months. You paint, he said. Badly, she said. But yes. What is that one? He nodded toward the canvas. She looked at it. Abstract, all warm oranges and deep blues, started the week after the retreat. I don't know yet, she said honestly. He looked at her. It's beautiful. She sat beside him. He reached for her hand without looking, threaded his fingers through hers, and they sat in the warm quiet of her apartment while the city murmured outside. I want a different life, he said, not dramatically, simply the way you say a thing you've been holding for a long time. I want to finish what I've started, extricate what can be extricated, and build something that doesn't require me to have people like that around. How long? She asked. 2 years. Maybe 3. Are you asking me something? He turned to look at her. In her warm apartment light, with the exhaustion stripped away, she could see it clearly on his face. The thing he hadn't quite said yet, enormous and carefully held. Not yet, he said. But I will be. She squeezed his hand. They stayed like that until he fell asleep on her couch, and she put a blanket over him and went to bed and lay awake for a while in the very pleasant trouble of loving a complicated man. Spring came to the city with its usual shameless theatrics. Cherry blossoms in the park, the smell of rain on warm pavement, the specific golden light of late April pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Park and Stone's 34th floor. 3 months had rearranged Ollie's world. Not visibly, to the office she remained exactly what she'd been hired to be, a formidable analyst whose restructuring plan had already saved the company 8 figures in Q1. Professionally, she was untouchable. The nature of her relationship with J1 was known, she suspected, by exactly the people it needed to be known by, and had been handled with characteristic Park precision. An internal disclosure to HR, a formal memo acknowledging the relationship and the protocols in place, the elevation of her reporting structure to the board rather than direct to him. He had done it right. She'd expected nothing less. What she hadn't expected was how it felt to be loved by him, because that was what it was, even unspoken, even still wrapped in the reserve he wore like a second skin. He remembered everything. The book she mentioned once and found on her desk the following week. The way she took her coffee. Her mother's birthday. He'd sent flowers to Lagos, coordinating with her sister in secret, and her mother had called Ali crying with joy, and Ali had sat in the bathroom at work for 10 minutes composing herself. He was not a man who used words easily. He used actions instead, with an architect's precision, each one placed exactly where it would carry the most weight. It was a Saturday evening when he finally said it. They were cooking in his apartment, her idea, her menu, Nigerian pepper soup, because she'd decided it was time he knew what real food tasted like. He was attempting to follow her instructions, making a mess of the yam preparation, and she was laughing at him. Genuinely, unself-consciously, the full warm laugh he'd told her once was his favorite sound. He put down the knife, turned to face her. The laughter died slowly as she read his expression. Open, unguarded in a way she'd learned to recognize as requiring courage from him. "I love you," he said, clean and unadorned. The kitchen was quiet except for the simmer of the pot. She set down her wooden spoon, crossed the distance between them, took his face in her hands, this beautiful, complicated, ink-marked face that had become as familiar to her as the city outside his windows. "I know," she said. "I've known for a while." He exhaled, long and slow, like something releasing. "I love you too," she said, very inconveniently. His arms came around her, pulling her close, his lips finding her forehead, her temple, the curve of her jaw. She felt the tension that lived permanently in him ease, and she thought that this specifically was what she wanted to do. To be the place where that tension could rest. "The pepper soup is going to burn," he murmured against her hair. "Let it," she said. He laughed. A real laugh, full and warm, the kind she'd only heard a handful of times. She stored it carefully. The soup survived. They ate it on the floor by his window, the city glittering below, and talked until 2 in the morning about nothing important at all. A year later, on a Thursday evening in late March, Ali stood at the window of the apartment she and J1 now shared. A new place chosen together, with high ceilings and room for her easel and bookshelves they'd filled side by side, and watched the city do what it always did at dusk. Light itself up, grid by grid, a million lit windows against the darkening sky. Behind her, she could hear him on the phone. English this time, a board call, his voice measured and calm. In the past year, the exits he'd been working toward had begun, quietly, to close behind him. 2 former lieutenants relocated. A network unwound thread by thread. It was not fast, and it was not simple, and there were still evenings when the weight of it settled on him. But he was building what he'd told her he wanted, with the same meticulous patience he brought to everything. Park and Stone had expanded. Her restructuring model had become the framework for 3 additional divisions. She'd been offered a partnership, not by him pointedly, but by the board independently, with the kind of letter that made her call her mother and cry in the best possible way. Her mother was coming to visit in May. J1 was learning to make jollof rice. He was not good at it yet. He was extraordinarily committed to improving. She heard the call end. His footsteps. His arms came around her from behind, his chin finding her shoulder, both of them looking out at the lit city. "Good call?" she asked. "Productive." A pause. "The Singapore deal is closing next month." "I know. I drafted the logistics framework." She felt him smile against her neck. "You drafted my best deals before I've finished thinking of them. You hired well." "I did," he said. Something in his voice shifted. Quieter, more deliberate. "Ali." "Yes." He turned her gently to face him. He was holding something, small, black velvet, the sight of which sent her heart into a full sprint, and his expression was the one she loved most. Open, a little undone, all the careful architecture of his composure laid aside. "I told you," he said, "a year ago that I would be asking something of you. Eventually." "You did," she whispered. "I'm asking now." He opened the box. The ring inside was simple, precise, extraordinary. A diamond set in dark gold, classical and modern at once, chosen with the same considered care he brought to everything that mattered. "I want to build all of it with you. The company, the life, whatever comes next." He looked at her. "Will you?" She thought about a first day at work and the feeling of the floor dropping out from under her. She thought about a fire in the Catskills and snow on a porch and a photograph she'd refused to be afraid of. She thought about pepper soup on a kitchen floor and a man learning to laugh and a ring chosen in the particular dark gold of a life being reconstructed, deliberately toward light. "Yes," she said. "Obviously yes." He slid the ring onto her finger. She kissed him, long and unhurried, with the particular tenderness of two people who have chosen each other in full knowledge of what that means. Outside, Manhattan continued its indifferent, brilliant performance. Inside, in the warm space of what they'd made, everything was exactly as complicated and exactly as right as it needed to be. Ali Yemi had crossed an ocean looking for a beginning. She had found, in the most inconvenient and glorious possible way, that she had arrived. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to leave us a comment. Also like, share and subscribe to our channel, and click on the notification bell to get notified when a new story comes up. Don't forget to tell us